Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the president of the Human Rights Campaign, Chad Griffin, and Hillary Clinton.
I got the eye of the tiger, the fire, dancing through the fire, 'cause I am a champion, and you're gonna hear me roar louder, louder than a lion, 'cause I am a champion, and you're gonna hear me roar.
Wow, how about that for a welcome? Good evening and thank you. On behalf of the Human Rights Campaign and our nearly 2 million members and supporters, I can't tell you how excited we are to be here in Iowa with all of you for her. We're here because, I have to tell you, the stakes could not be higher for our country and for the LGBT community, our people and our families. And that's because all of the progress we've made and all that we're still fighting for, all of it is on the ballot this year. Think about how much we've achieved under President Obama's leadership. From nationwide marriage equality, to the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, to landmark hate crimes legislation. And despite all that progress, we know we still have so much left to do. We need to pass the Equality Act in Congress. We need to pass it so that no LGBT person can ever be fired from their job or evicted from their home simply because of who they are. We need to end the epidemic of anti-transgender violence that plagues our country today. And we need to stop the stigma and the spread of HIV. And we need to continue to expand that map of LGBT equality around the world. But even as a majority of Republicans and independents today support full federal equality, the vast majority, the leading Republican candidates for president, they're still living in the dark ages. They've not only threatened to halt our progress, they've promised to revoke, repeal, and overturn all the gains that President Obama has made. They've suggested we actually bring back Don't Ask, Don't Tell and discharge thousands of gay service members who are proudly serving this country today. They've urged states to ignore the Supreme Court's historic marriage ruling until they can appoint new justices who look a lot more like Antonin Scalia than Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They vowed to undo everything that President Obama has accomplished, everything we as a community have accomplished. Just today, in fact, in Cedar Rapids, Senator Rubio promised to repeal every single one of President Obama's executive orders, including those that protect LGBT people. They're serious, folks. And astonishingly, in 2016, some of the Republican candidates still think that being LGBT is a lifestyle choice. Doesn't that make you, by the way, wonder about that moment where Ted Cruz decided to be straight? Think about it. It's a good question. They should all get that question, right? But seriously, folks, we've come too far. We fought too hard and accomplished too much to allow these pandering politicians to play politics with our rights, with our lives. And that's why we need to mobilize and to organize and elect a new pro-equality champion to the White House who will fight for us each and every day she sits in that Oval Office. My friends, Hillary Clinton is that champion. She's the one that we can count on to lead us as president, and she's the one that we can count on to defeat whichever one of these wackadoos ends up as the Republican nominee. Hillary has the experience, the determination, and the passion and courage that will allow her to make meaningful change from the first day she walks into that Oval Office. You see, she led as senator. She was steadfast in her opposition to the discriminatory federal marriage amendment, and she helped us ensure the Constitution would never be amended to deny rights to our fellow Americans. She fought for the passage of non-discrimination protections and for the expansion of hate crime laws, and for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell and DOMA. She also led as Secretary of State. She made the inclusion of LGBT rights a top priority of our American foreign policy, and we will never forget her bold declaration that was heard around the world, that gay rights are human rights and human rights are gay rights. And she'll lead as president too. She'll keep fighting for us in the equal protection that our families still need. She will fight for the gay factory worker who faces daily harassment from his superiors. She will fight for that lesbian couple raising 2 kids in Birmingham. She'll fight for that transgender woman in Baltimore who's seeing her friends murdered in the streets. And she'll fight for that young LGBT teen living with HIV on the streets of this very city. And she'll fight for each and every one of us, because our fight is her fight. And that's why the Human Rights Campaign is fighting to ensure that the leader joining me on the stage tonight shatters that glass ceiling once and for all. You see, this is a leader who spent a lifetime standing up for us, and now it's our turn to stand up for her. So please join me in welcoming a trailblazer, a true champion of equality, and the leader we need for the battles ahead, the next President of the United States, Hillary Clinton.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really want to thank Chad and all of my friends at the other HRC for your support. I am really grateful for everything you have done, are doing, and will do to make our world more just, fair, and equal. And for those who are not part of the LGBT community, we all benefit when every one of our fellow human beings can live lives of purpose and meaning without being demeaned, without being discriminated against. This fight is for all Americans. I am so grateful to have this endorsement because Chad is absolutely right. If you listen to all the Republican candidates, they are all on the record to turn back the rights of Americans. LGBT rights, women's rights, voting rights, workers' rights, civil rights, and we cannot let them succeed, so we need to nominate a candidate who can beat the Republicans and win in November of 2016. Now, I got to tell you, I owe the people of Iowa a lot, because since April, I have been traveling across this state, having so many conversations. They started out small because I wanted to listen. You know, I actually think that is a good trait for a leader to have, to listen and learn from all of you. And I can't thank you enough for sharing your concerns, your hopes, your worries, your dreams. And what I have heard from so many people really goes to the heart of who we are as Americans. Because as I've listened, I've become even more convinced that we have to begin, once again, to support each other, to care for each other, to get beyond the divisiveness and the mean-spiritedness, to show a little more kindness and a lot more respect. And if we do that, we can make a difference in so many lives. I've known Chad Griffin since he was a young boy in Arkansas who has made good. Last time I saw him, he pulled out a photo of the two of us so many years ago. You know, the way you date my photos is by hairstyles. It's kind of a archaeological exercise. But I know a little bit about what it was like for him growing up in Arkansas, learning about who he was and is, looking for understanding, looking for an opportunity to be fully himself. And I so respect that journey that many of you in this crowd tonight have taken. And I want that journey to be easier and smoother for young people today who have to do it for themselves. So for me, equality is, of course, about passing laws, enforcing them, enforcing regulations, but it also is changing hearts and minds. You know, just the other day, on Friday in Rochester, New Hampshire, I had a big town hall, and we had time for some questions, and I called on a man back in the crowd, and he said he could no longer afford his HIV medication. He's been taking it for years. It's literally saved his life, enabled him to continue working and being a very productive, contributing member of his community. But it's now $2,600 a month. And he just asked, how can the drug companies do that to us? How can they take something that is critical to my staying alive, being functioning and productive, and just make money off of it without regard to what happens? We need to build on the progress that we have made under President Obama. Chad outlined a number of the issues that are of particular concern to the LGBT community. And you can count on me to continue to not only defend them, but to take them further. And there are so many people who need results right now. That man can't wait. He needs help right now. The mother who in Cedar Rapids told me that her son is diabetic and the price of insulin has been raised 3 times in the last year. They can't wait either. The young woman who waited on Senator Cory Booker and me today in a little restaurant in Cedar Rapids, we just were making conversation and we said, well, how long have you worked here and what do you do? And she told us she's a young mom, she has 2 kids, she works one job from 7 to 7, then she goes to the restaurant and works till 3. She can't wait for the minimum wage to be raised. She can't wait for us to enforce the opportunities she deserves to make more out of her own life. So you see, this campaign for me is about all those people that I have met across Iowa and the United States. Their stories stay in my heart. And I think every day, what can I do as a candidate, but also as the president, to try to help ease some of the challenges that face them? I am thrilled that we are going to be working together throughout this campaign to make LGBT rights a campaign issue, to enlist more people who understand what's at stake. Yes, we've got to make sure the price of drugs are affordable. Yes, we have to pass the Equality Act in Congress. Yes, we have to end the travesty that under our Constitution you can get married on Saturday and because of it, fired on Monday. We have to be sure that we do everything we can to end violence against transgender people. And the kind of effort that the United States can lead to actually achieve what I called for as Secretary of State, an AIDS-free generation. We can get there together. When I became Secretary of State, thanks to the generosity of the American people, we were providing medicine to 1.7 million people, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, so that they too could stay alive with HIV and AIDS. And I looked at it with my team and I said, how do we get more people? Because there were millions more who were not getting any help at all. And here's what we did. We looked at how we could get generic drugs, which are cheaper and just as effective, to more people, without spending a penny more in government funds. We tripled the number of people that you and the United States are keeping alive and giving another chance to for the future. Now, this election is so consequential because, as Chad said, you could not have 2 more different visions of who we are as Americans and where our country should be headed than what we have between the Democratic candidates and the Republicans. And what the Republicans are advocating are failed policies and mean-spirited policies. So let me just take a few. You know, on the economy, they want to go back to the failed policy of trickle-down economics. It didn't work before, it won't work again. And I'll tell you, there's a little fact that they hate when I remind people of it, but our economy does better when we have a Democrat in the White House. And you know, we don't have to go back 100 years. Let's just go back 35 years. We've had 5 presidents, 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. I know both of the Democrats. And I'll tell you what, they each inherited economic problems from their Republican predecessors. In my husband's case, it was a recession, and it was the quadrupling of our national debt and a rising deficit. He got to Washington, and somebody asked him, "So, what do you uniquely bring to Washington to deal with our problems?" And he thought for a minute, and he said, "Well, I guess arithmetic. It's time we make things add up for the American people." And after 8 years, we had 23 million new jobs, and most importantly, and this is what I really want you to hear, we didn't just have 23 million new jobs. Incomes went up for everybody. The top, the middle, working people, poor people, and we lifted more people out of poverty than any other time in recent history. And we ended up with a balanced budget and a surplus. Now, you would think inheriting that kind of success might have changed the Republicans' minds. Maybe they would have thought to themselves, you know, raising taxes on the wealthy actually worked, right? Investing in new jobs and something called the New Markets Tax Credit and empowerment zones and lots of other things, they worked. Oh, no. In fact, it was right back to trickle-down economics. Slash taxes on the wealthy. I was in the Senate arguing day after day against what I saw as failed economic policies that would turn us back. And then they just took their eyes off of regulating the financial markets and the mortgage markets. In fact, I remember a picture of the fellow that President Bush put in charge of the SEC, which is supposed to regulate Wall Street. And that guy took a picture, big smile on his face, a chainsaw in his hand, cutting through a big pile of regulation. Well, that worked out really well, didn't it? They turned away from the excesses in the financial markets and the mortgage markets. And you know what happened? The worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. And along comes President Obama, another Democrat elected to the White House. Now imagine this young, dynamic man going into the White House, and we're losing 800,000 jobs a month. And all of a sudden, it looks like the entire car industry is going to collapse, taking millions more jobs with it. We ended up losing 9 million jobs because of that great recession. And 5 million houses were lost, and $13 trillion in family wealth was wiped out. I went to see President Obama after the election. He called, asked me to come see him. I didn't know why. Turned out he wanted me to be Secretary of State. But before we got to that, he said to me, "It is so much worse than they told us." And it was. And I don't think President Obama gets the credit he deserves for digging us out of that big ditch. So, I really believe he saved us from a Great Depression. So we dug ourselves out. We've recovered about 14 million jobs, but incomes haven't gone up. People are working really hard, like the young woman I met at the restaurant, and they haven't had a raise in 15 years. So now what we've got to do is, well, yes, we have to do that too. That's what we hope, because I'm going to build on what works and what President Obama did. And I've laid out specific plans about how we're going to create more good-paying jobs and raise incomes. Now, I think there are some really obvious things we have to do. We need more investment in infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our tunnels, our ports, our airports, our rail systems. There is so much work to be done, and these are jobs you cannot export. They have to be done right here in Iowa and across America. And we're going to change the tax code, so instead of giving incentives to export jobs and factories, we're going to give incentives to bring them back, put them back here in our country, put people to work in our country. And one of the biggest economic opportunities we have is to actually begin working against climate change. This is not only a crisis, it can give us economic opportunity. And, look, I hear the Republicans, every one of them, they get asked all the time about climate change. You know what they say. They say, well, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. And, I got to tell you, there's an easy answer to that. Go talk to a scientist and actually listen to a scientist, right? But in addition to just being in denial, they're also missing what we can do. Some country is going to be the 21st century clean energy superpower. I think it's either going to be China, Germany, or us, and I want it to be us. We can do this together. And when I'm talking to crowds around the country and I see some skeptical looks on people's faces, like, really? Can we really do that? You know what I tell them? I say, look at Iowa. You are already getting 1/3 of your electricity from renewables, mostly wind. And you already have 7,000 people employed in the wind industry. And so what we've got to do is knit together what's already happening in a lot of places and lift our sights to set some big goals. I've said, I want to see us deploy 500 million more solar panels by the end of my first term. And I want us to have enough clean energy to power every home in America by the end of my second term. And people say all the time, well, how will you ever convince the Congress to do that? Well, I'll tell you, we now have enough states with Republicans in the Senate and the House who are actually beginning to invest more in wind and solar and other renewables. So I think we can do this, but we have to make it a high priority, and we've got to be very clear that this is not a choice, this is a necessity. So when I think about what we're going to do to create more jobs, I also think about small business, which is not getting the credit it needs. My dad was a small businessman. We still get 60% of the jobs in this country from small business. And we have to make it more possible for everybody, especially young people, to start small businesses, entrepreneurs to take their good ideas. We can do this. And then the two fastest ways to raise income is let's raise the federal minimum wage so that people are not working full-time in poverty. And let's finally guarantee equal pay for women's work, which will be a huge boost to the economy. So I tell you, I also believe that we have got to fix the tax code. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. We're going where the money is. We're going to be taxing the wealthy more than we're taxing them right now. And I'm the only candidate running who has made it clear I pledge to raise your incomes, not your taxes. Because if we go after where it is, we can raise enough money to make the investments that I think will make us richer and stronger. And I've got a couple ideas. I'll share a few of them. One comes from Warren Buffett, your neighbor in Omaha, who I was proud to have endorse me because he wants every millionaire to have to pay at least a 30% tax, because right now they often pay less with all the gimmicks and the games they play with the tax code than teachers or nurses or firefighters or police officers. But I want to go further. I want us to impose what I call a fair share surcharge on incomes of $5 million and more, because we need to capture all of their income and not let them evade their taxes and support this country the way that they should. And then we can use that money to make college affordable. We can use that money to start providing paid family leave for working families. We can use that money to provide a tax credit for people taking care of their older relatives with Alzheimer's and other problems. We can use that money to invest more in recovery and treatment when it comes to addiction. We can use that money for more medical research. So we're going to form a great political movement that will make it clear what's at stake. I can envision the ads already. You know, you go into a congressional district where there are 2 people making more than $5 million. Everybody else, working hard, but not making progress enough anyway. And we say, well, you can either ask your representative to vote for 2 people, or you can ask them to vote for 348,000 people. I think it's a pretty compelling case. Now, I have no illusions about how hard this will be with the other party, because they do the bidding of their rich and powerful special interests. But we're going to make progress day by day, step by step. And we will make sure that we not only get more growth, but more fairness in our economy. And then I want to mention another issue that's been, a pretty important one in our Democratic primary. Aren't you proud of our Democratic primary compared to the Republican primary? Really, don't you think? Yeah. I mean, honestly, we have disagreements about issues and policies. That's what you're supposed to have when you're running for office, but nothing like what's going on the other side. So there's a lot of talk about Wall Street in our Democratic primary, and I just want to tell you, I went after Wall Street when I was a senator from New York. I advocated closing the carried interest loophole that benefits hedge fund managers. I pointed out the dangers of the mortgage manipulations, and nobody will remember this, but in Iowa in 2007, I even ran an ad which said, we got to watch out. This mortgage market is out of control. And then I introduced some CEO bonus and compensation changes, which ended up in Dodd-Frank. So I have a record, and I also have a commitment. I believe strongly that we need to make sure Wall Street never wrecks Main Street again. And I understand people's intense feelings about the big banks, but when we passed Dodd-Frank and President Obama signed it, we set up a process to go after the big banks if they pose a systemic risk to our economy. And I've made real clear that if they do, I will use the process that has already been established, because no bank is too big to fail and no executive is too powerful to jail. So if they break the laws, if they pose risk, we will use what is in Dodd-Frank. But here's the deal. That's not enough. That's why my plan goes further, because the big banks are now being watched all the time, and we have this legislative authority. But think about what really contributed to what happened in 2008. It was the investment banks. Remember Lehman Brothers, somebody said? It was the big insurance conglomerate, AIG. It was mortgage companies like Countrywide. It was smaller banks like Wachovia compared to the really big ones. So we have to have a plan to go after all of the financial institutions that cause a risk. I have outlined such a comprehensive plan, and I am proud that people from Barney Frank of Dodd-Frank fame to Paul Krugman, the economist who writes for the New York Times, have said, I have a tougher, more effective, more comprehensive plan to actually prevent Wall Street from ever again hurting us like they did in 2008. And one of the other differences, which we have, not on the goal, but on the means, is health care. You know, before it was called Obamacare, it was called Hillary Care. And I was working to achieve universal coverage. And oh my goodness, the drug companies and the insurance companies went after me. And we weren't successful. That didn't stop me. I got up and figured out, okay, what can we do now? So I worked with the Republicans and Democrats to get the Children's Health Insurance Program, which covers 8 million kids. And when President Obama passed the Affordable Care Act, I was ecstatic. Democrats have been working to get to universal health care coverage since Harry Truman. And now we have the foundation to build on. Now, the Republicans, they all say, repeal, repeal, repeal. They never tell you what they would ever put in its place, because they can't, because you know what they'll do? They'll just go back to the way it was, when insurance companies can deny you coverage because you have a pre-existing condition, when women are charged more for our health care than men, when young people have no options because they can't be on their parents' policy. We're not going back. We're not going to let the Republicans repeal the Affordable Care Act. Here's what I want to do. We are now at 90% coverage. We have 10% to go. I want to decrease costs, out-of-pocket costs. I want to cap prescription drug costs. I want to make the prescription drug companies have to negotiate with Medicare, which will bring down costs throughout the system. I want to take away their tax benefit for advertising on television. Somebody tells you in the next week, well, you know, Hillary Clinton wants to destroy drug companies' research. Nothing could be further from the truth. By taking away their tax break for advertising, because they spend more money on advertising right now than they do on research, I'm actually giving them an opportunity to put more money into research, to come up with more life-saving drugs and interventions that will help keep us healthy. But what I don't want to do is start all over again. I do not want to plunge our country back into a contentious debate over health care. I don't want to start at zero. Getting from 0 to 100 is a lot harder than getting from 90 to 100. So I'm going to defend and improve the Affordable Care Act. And I'm going to get those drug costs down, because it is not sustainable. I don't care what your problem might be, you should not be held hostage to whether or not you can afford the drugs you require to stay alive and stay healthy. The final thing I want to mention is this. You know, when you go to caucus on Monday night, you are going to caucus for both a president and a commander-in-chief. And the entire world will be watching, because you are the first people in our country who get to express an opinion. Now, I have listened to my Republican side, and basically when they talk about foreign policy and national security, they have only two responses: bomb, send American troops, and bomb some more. That is not a policy. That is not smart, and that has to be rejected. On the other hand, I don't think we can withdraw from the world. I think we have to stay engaged and leading because a lot of the challenges we face have to be managed, even if they can't be solved. You know, when President Obama and I started working together, we realized that the Iranians were on a fast track to a nuclear weapon. And this all happened while George W. Bush was in office and Dick Cheney was vice president. They had mastered the nuclear fuel cycle, they had built covert facilities, and they were stocking them with centrifuges. Now, we had sanctioned them. I'd voted for every sanction. I voted to sanction not just oil, I voted to sanction pistachio nuts, anything I could sanction. I was standing up there voting, sanction them. It was not enough. The United States alone was not enough to drive them to the negotiating table. So I spent 18 months putting together a coalition to impose global sanctions on Iran. And when that was successful and agreed to in the UN Security Council, I had to spend more time convincing countries, particularly in Asia, not to keep buying oil and gas, because their attitude was kind of like, you know, that's your problem, you people over there. We got to grow our economy. I said, oh, no, this is your problem. Because if we don't stop them from getting a nuclear weapon, there's going to be an arms race in the Middle East that could end everything. And we got that done. And then I began the negotiations to see how far we could go. And I was so proud that President Obama and Secretary Kerry brought it to a successful conclusion with the Iran nuclear agreement. Now we have to enforce it, and that's what I have said. We put a lid on the program, now we've got to enforce it so they don't get out of it, get around it, because that will spark a nuclear arms race in the most volatile region in the world. And I've laid out my plans for going after ISIS. We got to deprive them of territory, lead an air coalition, intensify the efforts that President Obama has done to make sure that the Iraqi army and the Sunni fighters and the Kurdish fighters are really being successful against ISIS. But then we also have to cut off their foreign funds, their foreign fighters, and take them online, where they propagandize, where they recruit and celebrate barbarity. And here at home, we have to keep America safe. And that means better coordination between state and local and federal law enforcement, getting intelligence from our friends in the world. But here's what it also means. When you have the kind of comments being made by Republican candidates about American Muslims and Muslims, it's not only shameful and wrong, it's dangerous. Because I want you to just think about this. We need to be united in our country against this terrorist threat. And American Muslims and their families are on the front lines. I went to Minneapolis, met with a group of Somali Americans, and they know that they have to be alert and vigilant because they've had terrorist groups, namely Al-Shabaab, come to recruit young men right out of the Twin Cities. So we now have to forge a very united front. You don't do that by making people feel unwanted, insulting them, threatening them. And you sure don't get a coalition together of Muslim nations to fight terrorism if people running to be President of the United States and Commander-in-Chief are engaging in that kind of language. So this is not a throwaway. This is a critical difference because we know that people all over the world really listen to what's being said in our presidential election. And they pay very close attention to what any president says. So we have to be really careful. And we can't be engaging in loose, inflammatory rhetoric that will actually make us less safe. So I am prepared and ready to make those hard choices, as I wrote my book about, to make sure we are safe and that we are leading. Now, just as an aside, you know, after I listened to the Republicans, they have a phrase, they blame Obama Clinton for everything. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world, it's Obama Clinton's fault. I listened to that and I thought, well, maybe they don't know what we did because, we, of course, did the Iran deal, but I also negotiated a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas using the Muslim Brotherhood president, Morsi, in Cairo, and, got a blind dissident out of China after negotiating with the Chinese for days, and stood up for women's rights and gay rights across the world, often against very tough responses. Anyway, I thought, well, give them the benefit of the doubt, so I sent them all a copy of my book, Hard Choices. And I wrote a note to them and I said, you've got so many people running over there, you could form a book club and maybe, sit around and talk about some of these hard choices that we face as a nation. But that will also be a big distinction. Whoever the Republicans nominate is coming right after the very careful, thoughtful foreign policy that President Obama has led and that I was privileged to be part of. And we have to be ready because there's a lot of concern and even fear in our country. You see what happened in Paris, you see what happened in San Bernardino. Americans want to know that the person they make president and commander-in-chief can deal with these issues, these threats. And I want you to think about that as we head toward the caucus. There is so much at stake in this election. There's such an urgency about what we are facing. And I don't think America can wait. We can't wait to see the election of a Republican who will turn us back and undermine our rights, our economy, our healthcare system, and so much else. And we can't wait for new ideas to get tested and tried and throw us back into a big debate about healthcare and other things. We have to be prepared to chart a course that builds on the progress we've made. I am absolutely unapologetic. I believe that we would be making a grave mistake as a nation to turn away from what President Obama has accomplished. And I will tell you, for anyone who doubts the importance of that, think of what a difference it might have made if George W. Bush had not been elected on so many fronts. So for everyone who is here tonight, for those of you who are supporting me already, I thank you. I need you. I hope you will work the next week as hard as you can to reach as many people as possible and convince them to come caucus. And for those of you who are still shopping, a very important part of this process, I hope you will think hard about what we need to do to nominate someone who can withstand the barrage that the Republicans are preparing. We know the Koch brothers have said they'll spend $1 billion. We know they're already running ads against me. In fact, one of the ways you can know my Wall Street plan is tougher is because Karl Rove is running an ad against me. He took money from the financial industry to run an ad against me to convince Democrats not to support me. And then 2 hedge fund billionaires, they started their own super PAC, and they're doing the same. You got to ask yourself, why are they so worried about me? Because they know I mean what I say, I know how to get results, and I will not back down from standing up to them and fighting for you and fighting for our country. Let's go out and win the caucus. Thank you all, and God bless you.
Waking up in the morning and to be well. Quite honest with you, I ain't really sleep well. You ever feel like your train of thought's been derailed? That's when you press on, lean